The soft jazz music drifted through the elegant space of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, where New York's elite had gathered for my annual charity gala. I, Sarah Williams, CEO of Horizon Tech, stood in my tailored black Chanel dress, champagne flute in hand, wearing success like armor. My perfectly styled hair and confident smile hid 20 years of pain that I'd buried beneath achievements and accolades. Ms. Williams, I apologize for the interruption. Mike, my head of security, approached with a concerned expression that immediately set off alarms in my head. There's an older couple in the lobby insisting they need to see you. They claim to be your parents. The word parents hit me like a physical blow. 20 years of carefully constructed walls threatened to crumble in an instant. The champagne in my glass trembled slightly before I steadied my hand. Did they give their names? I asked, my voice unnaturally calm. Robert and Eleanor Williams, ma'am. The ballroom suddenly felt airless. Faces around me blurred as memories I'd spent 2 decades suppressing rushed forward. The rain soaking through my clothes. The slam of the front door. My father's last words to me. You're no longer our daughter. I straightened my shoulders and turned to Mike, my expression hardening into something unrecognizable even to myself. Please inform Mr. and Mrs. Williams that their daughter died 20 years ago on the exact night they threw her out into the rain. My voice was ice. The woman standing here now owes them nothing. Mike hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Ma'am, they seem desperate. The woman, your mother, she's crying. Something dangerous flashed in my eyes. Tears didn't move them when I was 18, pregnant, and begging not to be thrown away like garbage. They won't move me now. I turned back to the wealthy donors waiting for my attention, a practiced smile returning to my face as if nothing had happened. But inside, the carefully buried past was already beginning to unravel. My penthouse overlooking Central Park was my sanctuary, the place where I could shed the armor of Sarah Williams, business titan, and just be myself. Tonight, that sanctuary felt violated. I paced across the Italian marble floors, still in my gala dress, unable to shake the knowledge that they were back. Mom? I thought you'd be asleep by now. My daughter Lily appeared in the hallway, her Yale sweatshirt and messy bun a reminder of her surprise visit home for the weekend. At 19, she was everything I'd fought to become at her age: confident, educated, secure. Just some work stress, honey. The lie came easily after years of protecting her from the truth of my past. Lily studied my face with intelligent eyes so similar to my own. The gala went well, though, right? I saw it trending on social. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. The doorman. Ms. Williams, I apologize for the late hour, but the couple from earlier at your event. They're here. My blood ran cold. How did they find my address? They said they've been searching for you for years. Ma'am, they're elderly and it's starting to rain. 20 years ago, I stood in the rain 3 months pregnant, as my parents closed their door on me forever. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Send them away, I said firmly. But Lily had heard enough. Mom, who's downstairs? What's going on? The doorman's voice came through again. Ms. Williams, Mrs. Williams, your mother, she's not well. She nearly collapsed in the lobby. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 2 decades pressing down on me. Send them up. Lily looked at me with growing confusion. Mom. My parents, I said, the word strange on my tongue after so many years. Your grandparents. Her eyes widened. The ones you said were dead? The doorbell rang before I could respond, each chime like a hammer against the walls I'd built to protect us both. The moment they stepped into my penthouse, 20 years vanished like smoke. My father Robert, now with silver hair and deeper lines around his mouth, still carried himself with that same rigid posture. My mother Eleanor looked smaller, frilier, her once perfect appearance now weathered by time. Her eyes, so like my own, widened as she took in the luxury surrounding her. Sarah, she whispered, reaching for me. I stepped back. Don't. Lily hovered nearby, curiosity and confusion battling on her face. This is your daughter? My father's voice broke slightly. Our granddaughter? You have no granddaughter, I said coldly. You lost that right 20 years ago. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Sarah, please. If you just let us explain. Explain what? The words erupted from me with unexpected force. How you threw your pregnant teenage daughter onto the street. How neither of you answered my calls for weeks afterward. How I slept in my car until it was repossessed. How I gave birth alone in a county hospital because I couldn't afford anything better. Each question landed like a physical blow. My mother flinched with each one while my father's face grew paler. We've regretted it every day, he said quietly. Regret doesn't keep a pregnant teenager fed. I snapped. It doesn't pay medical bills or college tuition or daycare costs. Lily stepped forward. Mom, maybe we should hear them out. There's nothing to hear, Lily, I said. But my parents were already drinking in the sight of their granddaughter. You look just like your mother did, Eleanor whispered. So beautiful. I saw my father taking in the expensive art on my walls, the view of Central Park, the obvious signs of wealth. Something in his expression shifted subtly. We've been having some financial troubles, he said carefully. The medical bills. Your mother's heart condition. And there it was. The real reason for their sudden reappearance. Get out, I said, my voice deadly quiet. Sarah, please, my mother begged. We've lost everything. So did I replied. The difference is I built something new. You think you can just walk back into my life after 20 years and ask for money? My voice rose despite my attempts to remain calm. Did you think I'd just write you a check and we'd all pretend the past never happened? My father's face hardened, that familiar expression that had terrified me as a teenager. We are still your parents. Parents. I laughed, the sound brittle and harsh. Parents don't throw their children away. Parents don't abandon their daughters when they need them most. Lily stood frozen, witnessing a side of me she'd never seen before. The controlled, composed CEO was unraveling before her eyes. We did what we thought was right at the time, my father insisted, his jaw tight. You were throwing your life away with that pregnancy. We thought you'd learn your lesson and come back. Learn my lesson? I stepped toward him, trembling with rage. My lesson was learning that I was completely alone in this world. That I couldn't count on anyone but myself. My mother sank onto my sofa, shoulders shaking with sobs. Please, Sarah. We've lost the house. Your father's business failed years ago. We have nowhere to go. That's not my problem, I said coldly. I had nowhere to go at 18 with a baby inside me. Somehow I managed. You heartless, my father started, but I cut him off. Don't you dare. Don't you dare judge me when you're the ones who taught me how to cut people off without remorse. I learned from the best. My father's face reddened with anger. We gave you everything growing up. The best schools, the best opportunities. And then you took it all away, I finished for him. Now get out of my home. Mom, stop. Lily's voice was quiet but firm. These are my grandparents. I have a right to know them. I turned to her, betrayal washing over me. You don't know what they did. Then tell me, she challenged. Tell me everything. I remember the rain. That's what haunts me most about that night, how the cold droplets soaked through my thin jacket as I stood on our porch, begging to be let back in. I was 18, 3 months pregnant and terrified. My boyfriend Tyler had already disappeared at the first mention of the word baby. My friends had slowly distanced themselves, uncomfortable with my new reality. But I never thought my parents would reject me too. Dad, please, I had begged through the door. Mom, it's pouring out here. No response came except the final click of the deadbolt. I spent that night in my old Honda Civic, the one I'd saved for by working weekends throughout high school. By morning, the windows were fogged with my breath and tears. I called home 17 times over the next week. Each call went straight to voicemail. The following month was a blur of desperate improvisation. I slept in my car until it was repossessed when I couldn't make the payments. The small-town coffee shop where I worked cut my hours when my pregnancy started to show customers are uncomfortable. My manager had explained with a shrug. Without the car, I lost my job. Without the job, I couldn't afford the prenatal vitamins the clinic said I needed. I pawned my laptop, my watch, the gold earrings I'd received for my 16th birthday. The lowest point came when I gave birth in the county hospital. The lights were harsh fluorescent, the sheets rough against my skin. When the nurse asked if someone should be called, I had no names to give her. I held Lily for the first time alone in that sterile room, both of us orphaned in different ways. We lived in a women's shelter for the first 6 months of Lily's life. I still remember the smell of industrial cleaner, the sound of crying children echoing through thin walls at night. I would hold Lily against my chest and whisper promises that someday, things would be different. Someday we would have a place of our own where no one could ever throw us out. That was when I met Jessica Barnes. She owned the small cafe where I eventually found work. A spunky woman in her 50s with prematurely silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes. When she caught me washing Lily in the cafe's bathroom sink one morning before opening, instead of firing me, she asked me where I was living. The shelter on Oakwood, I'd admitted, expecting judgment. Instead, she'd nodded thoughtfully. I have an empty apartment above the cafe. Previous manager lived there. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean. You can have it in exchange for opening the cafe at 5 and closing at 9. Seemed too good to be true. Why would you help me? Jessica's eyes had turned distant then. 30 years ago, I was you. No one helped me, and I promised myself if I ever had the chance to break that cycle, I would. The apartment was small but clean, with a tiny bedroom where Lily and I both slept in a second-hand double bed. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. Jessica became more than an employer, she became the mother I'd lost. She watched Lily while I took night classes at the community college. She taught me about business operations, letting me help with the cafe's books. When I showed an aptitude for technology, she encouraged me to pursue it. You're not defined by what happened to you, Sarah, she told me one night as we sat on her back porch, Lily asleep between us. You're defined by what you do next. When I received my acceptance letter to the State University's computer science program, Jessica was the one who celebrated with me, who figured out how we could make my class schedule work with Lily's needs and the cafe. I'm scared, I confessed to her. What if I fail? Then you'll get back up and try again, she said simply. That's what survivors do. Before Jessica died of cancer 5 years ago, I made her a promise that I would live fully, without letting my past define my future, that I would help others the way she had helped me. Looking at her now, as she lay in her hospital bed, I knew I would keep that promise. ## Chapter 7. The Shocking Truth. Back in my penthouse, the atmosphere was charged with decades of unspoken pain. Lily's face had grown increasingly troubled as I recounted fragments of my past. Why didn't you ever tell me? She asked, her voice small. I wanted to protect you, I said. I didn't want you to know that your grandparents thought you were a mistake, that they threw us away. That's not true, my father interrupted, his voice strained. Sarah, we need to tell you something. Something we should have told you years ago. I laughed bitterly. What more could you possibly say to justify what you did? My mother reached into her worn purse with trembling hands, pulling out a stack of letters, dozens of them, bound with a faded rubber band. We didn't throw you out, Sarah, she said quietly. Your grandparents did. The room seemed to tilt around me. What are you talking about? You were both there. You both watched me leave. My father's face was gray with shame. Your grandparents owned the house. They owned my business. They controlled everything. When they found out you were pregnant, they gave us an ultimatum: either you left, or we would all be on the street. You're lying, I whispered, but even as I said it, memories began to rearrange themselves in my mind, the way my mother had been sobbing that night, how my father couldn't look me in the eye. We were cowards, my father admitted, his voice breaking. We should have chosen you. Instead, we let them dictate our actions, and we've regretted it every day since. These are letters we wrote to you, my mother said, holding out the stack. Every week for years. We hired private investigators to find you, but you changed your name. Then your grandparents cut us off completely when they found out we were looking for you." Lily reached for the letters, opening one with careful fingers. She read aloud, "My dearest Sarah, it's been 6 months since we lost you. I pray every night that you and the baby are safe. Your father lost his position at the company last week when your grandfather discovered he'd been setting aside money to find you. I sank onto the sofa, my legs no longer able to support me. If what you're saying is true, why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you choose me?" "Because we were weak," my father said simply. "We were terrified of starting over with nothing. By the time we found the courage to stand up to them, you were gone." My mother reached for my hand. "I didn't pull away this time. We've been looking for you for 20 years, Sarah. We lost everything anyway, the house, the business, our standing in the community. But losing you was the only thing that truly mattered." For 3 days after my parents' revelation, I shut myself in my home office, the stack of letters spread across my desk. I read each one, tracking the desperation, the regret, the love that had poured from my parents' pens over the years. Letters they thought I would never read. Lily checked on me periodically, bringing coffee and sitting silently as I processed 20 years of misconceptions. "What are you thinking?" she asked on the 3rd day. I looked up at my daughter, this miracle who had given me purpose when I had nothing else. "I'm thinking about forgiveness and how complicated it is." "Are you going to forgive them?" I traced the tear-stained ink on one of the letters. "They failed me. They made the wrong choice." "Yes," Lily said simply, "but they've been punished for it far longer than I even knew they were suffering." I met my daughter's eyes. "And they're still my parents." That evening, I called the number my father had left. They were staying at a budget motel on the outskirts of the city, all they could afford. "I've booked you a suite at the Marriott downtown," I told them. "We need to talk more, but not in some motel room." My mother's voice caught. "Sarah, we can't accept." "It's not a gift," I said firmly. "It's just a better place to continue this conversation." What I didn't tell them was that I'd spent the day investigating their claims. My private investigator had confirmed everything: my grandparents' iron control over the family finances, my parents' gradual fall from grace after my disappearance, the multiple private investigators they'd hired over the years to try to find me. When we met the next day, I brought folders of my own documentation of my grandparents' manipulation, their financial abuse, their calculated cruelty. "They're still alive," I said, surprise evident in my voice. "Living in that same house in Connecticut." My father nodded grimly. "They're in their 80s now. Still as controlling as ever." I looked at these two broken people, my parents, and saw for the first time not just the ones who had failed me, but fellow victims of my grandparents' toxic control. "I built an empire from nothing," I said quietly, "and I did it thinking I was alone in the world. I'm not sure I can ever fully forgive you for not fighting harder for me." My mother nodded, tears streaming down her face. "But," I continued, "I'm not sure I want to punish you anymore either." 2 weeks later, I stood in the grand foyer of my grandparents' colonial mansion in Greenwich, the same house where I'd spent childhood holidays pretending to be the perfect granddaughter. My parents and Lily flanked me, 3 generations united by both blood and betrayal. My grandmother Margaret's face drained of color when she saw me. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice still carrying that imperial tone I remembered from childhood. "Hello, grandmother," I said calmly. "It's been a while." My grandfather Howard appeared behind her, his shock quickly masked by the cold disdain I remembered so well. "How dare you bring them here?" he said, gesturing to my parents. "They're no longer part of this family." "Interesting perspective," I replied, "since family seems to be something you discard rather easily." I stepped further into the house, uninvited. I thought it was time for a family reunion. Time to meet your great-granddaughter Lily. Time to see what became of the pregnant teenager you threw away. My grandmother's eyes flicked to Lily, unable to hide her curiosity. You look like a Williams, she said stiffly. I'm a Williams Barnes, Lily corrected her. My mother honored the woman who actually helped her when her blood relatives failed her. I moved to the mantel, studying the family photos, none of which included me. I didn't come here for reconciliation, I said, turning back to them. I came here to show you exactly what your cruelty accomplished. I nodded to Lily, who opened her laptop and connected it to their television. A slideshow began images of my company headquarters, my Forbes cover, philanthropic awards, headlines about Horizon Tech's revolutionary innovations, clips from my TED Talk on resilience. You thought you were punishing me, teaching me a lesson, I said as the images played. Instead, you freed me from this toxic family's expectations. You made me build something that was entirely my own. My grandfather's face had turned an unhealthy shade of red. If you came here to gloat, I came here to announce two things, I interrupted. First, I've established a foundation in Jessica Barnes' name, the woman who became my real family. It will support young single mothers pursuing education and career goals. My grandmother sniffed dismissively. And the second thing? I smiled, feeling decades of pain transforming into something lighter. The second thing is forgiveness, not for you, but for them. I gestured to my parents. They made a terrible mistake 20 years ago, choosing security over their daughter. But unlike you, they've spent 2 decades trying to make it right. I turned to my parents, whose eyes were wide with surprise. I'm not saying we can erase the past, but maybe we can build something new. The look of rage on my grandparents' faces as they realized they'd lost all power over us was the only revenge I needed. 6 months later, my penthouse was filled with laughter, a sound that had once been rare in these rooms. Lily was home from college for the weekend, showing my father how to use the latest smartphone. My mother was in the kitchen, teaching my assistant the secret to her apple pie recipe. The wounds weren't fully healed, perhaps they never would be. There were still moments of awkwardness, of old pain surfacing unexpectedly. But there was also something new growing in the spaces between us, something tentative and fragile, but real. The Jessica Barnes Foundation had already awarded its first round of scholarships to 10 young single mothers. I'd invited them all to a celebration dinner, watching with pride as they spoke of their dreams that would no longer be deferred because of one difficult chapter in their lives. You've created something beautiful here, my mother said, joining me on the balcony as I looked out over the city lights. Jessica taught me how to turn pain into purpose, I replied. She saved me when I had nothing. My mother's eyes filled with tears. I will regret every day that it wasn't us who saved you. I turned to her, really seeing her not just the mother who had failed me, but the woman who had spent 20 years searching for her lost daughter. The past is written, I said gently, but we're still writing the future. Later that night, as the gathering wound down, Lily found me in my office, looking through old photos of Jessica that would be displayed at the foundation's headquarters. You know what I realized? She said, perching on the edge of my desk. All these years, you told me I could be anything, do anything, that no obstacle was too big to overcome. I thought those were just things mothers tell their kids. I smiled at her. They usually are. But you actually lived it, she continued. You literally started with nothing and built all this. She gestured around us. Not just the company or the money, but this life. This family broken and pieced back together, but stronger at the mended places. I pulled her into a hug, breathing in the scent of her hair. The strongest things are often those that have been broken and repaired, I whispered. Sometimes the most beautiful flowers grow from forgotten soil. I was forgotten, but I bloomed anyway. And now I'll be the ground that nurtures other forgotten flowers, helping them grow toward the light they deserve.